a day, I live in a dream. I live in a dream. Baby, you're my angel. I'll do anything to make you smile.
Welcome to Only Trying to Help, the podcast where we try to help you be helpful to other people. I've brought back a guest who you've heard from many times. So Jennifer is with us today. I was trying to think, you were with us for episodes I know about working with teens, maybe a few times on that topic. And my goodness, I should have done my homework to look through all the other episodes that you've done with us. But I know one was really about teens in general, and then you did an episode about parenting teens. And
Yes.
so
Yeah.
you have a lot of expertise in that area. Jennifer, what is new in your life since you've last been on our show?
Well, what's new? Well, a friend and colleague, Malin Steele, another Swedish MI trainer, and Minty, where we know each other from, we released a book in Swedish on MI in schools. We're hoping someday to translate it into English. We'll see if I can get around to doing that. That's really exciting.
It is really exciting. Now, although some of our audience will know what MI is,
Yeah, right.
a lot of people will not, and you just said it about 10 times. So MI is motivational interviewing, and so it is this way of communicating with people about change, about growth, about decisions, about moving forward. And so, yes, as you've heard Jennifer say, MI, that's motivational interviewing, and that's what her book is focused on. And it is really exciting that you've added that into our body of work on how to work with young people, and this time in a school environment. Your other book was more focused on, I think you and I talked about it before, like the whole "it takes a village" approach to raising young people and working with teens. And so Lighthouse Conversations, Being a Beacon for Teens is Jennifer's first book, and the second book really focuses on equipping teachers with how to have those conversations.
Yeah, exactly. And I think one of the things that's important and again, I think we've talked about it on a previous podcast, but just this discussion of why people want to make changes and why teens specifically want to make changes. I mean, a lot of times I think we as adults kind of assume that we think teens are going to have the same reasons for wanting to go to school that we think they should have, like, oh, you're going to have a wonderful future and if you go to school and stuff. And that, it's not really, that might not be the case. It might be the case, but it might not be. So we're hoping that, well, with both of the books that I've written, that you can actually get some help in discovering a teen or a student's why.
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds great. And I asked you to come on the show today, and you said, well, what do you want to talk about? I'm going to say, I think exactly word for word what I told you. I said, I think the show's gone a little off the rails. And I said, I think we need to get back to basics. And I believe that, folks. So to the listeners, if you look through our list of episodes, I do think in the last year or two or three, some of our episodes have become so specific to like a very narrow example. And I thought, I want to go back to like what we did in season one, where we had like, but what is empathy? What is listening?
Yes.
What does it mean to care about people? And so I asked you to join me for an episode about just basic listening skills. Let's keep it broad and general here. And I'm excited for this because, on these topics that are like a big umbrella, there's just so much we could say. And when I mentioned it to you, you already had some ideas you wanted to share about what makes a good listener. Do you want to kick us off?
Sure. One of the things that I've been focusing quite a lot on in my trainings lately is actually Thomas Gordon's listening process. And it's and maybe you can I can draw something, you can put it on your underneath the podcast, but it's this whole like idea of how you have a speaker And this, I always giggle because I think of my kids, like my teens in this. But anyway, they have an idea in their head, and then from their head, there's a little process that happens that goes down to their mouth, right? And that process, Thomas Gordon calls it encoding. But basically, it's just a process where you think something, and then you got to kind of put it into words. And then the speaker decides to put it into words, and the listener hears these words. And there's lots that can go wrong there. But when the listener gets it into their head, there's a big, huge process, right? Like interpreting or decoding, as he says, where lots happens from what I think this person is meaning. And so there's this whole process with that. And a lot of the times when I'm talking to my trainees, we think about how when I think I know what this person means, I often don't go and check to make sure that's actually what they meant. What I do, and well, what I call in Swedish do is like answering them. So a person will say something to me, I will answer them, but I have no idea if what they meant to say was the same that I even answered. And I have an example. Is it okay if I use this example? Okay, so I
I
do
think it would help. It would help a lot, yeah, to kind of,
probably.
and maybe like if you haven't already thought of this, if you're going to describe two people, maybe give them names or something.
Okay, I can say Bob is the speaker, but that's not really a teen name, but we're going to go Bob is the speaker. I better write this down so I don't forget. And we'll
Okay.
say Miriam is the listener.
All right, we've got teenager Bob and listener Miriam.
Exactly. Okay, so teenager Bob wakes up in the morning, kind of late for school. You got to get into the thing here. Wakes up for school. Something happens that makes him think of something like, I'm kind of hungry. And Bob comes into the kitchen and he opens the fridge and looks in there and then says, there's nothing to eat. And so Miriam, the mother, sits there and hears there's nothing to eat. And then her process starts, this decoding interpretation is like, what? I was at the store yesterday and there's a fridge full of food. How can Bob not see this, right? So what happens to Miriam? Yep, she decides there's tons of food in the fridge. And so she answers that to Bob. Bob, I went to the store yesterday. There's tons of food to eat, right? Now,
Mhm.
what Miriam did in that situation is actually assume that her interpretation of Bob's words of there's nothing to eat in the house is true. And it could be true, but she went to the store yesterday. So what I'm getting at is that what we need to do is kind of Miriam needs to slow down and think, okay, I was at the store yesterday, so the fridge is full. So that can't really be what Bob means then. And stop and think, like, what other interpretations could there be? Well, one of the things Bob thinks, I don't feel like eating the food that's in the fridge,
Mhm.
right? Or I don't feel like cooking something because everything in the fridge I have to cook, right? And so instead of answering, if we use like our reflective listening where we try and give words to our interpretations of what we think the person means. So I would say, for example, so you're not keen on the food that's in the fridge,
Mhm.
right? That would be my reflection. I'd be like checking it back to Bob, and Bob can say, exactly. And so it's just kind of then I know how to act. Then I can say, okay, hey, Bob, you know what? I see that. I went shopping yesterday. There's tons of food in the fridge, but there's just nothing that you're really wanting to like have in the morning. So
Mhm.
let's talk about that. Does that make sense? Do you know what I mean?
You mean it's about like not just immediately reacting to the words, but trying to really listen through the words and
Yeah.
understand them.
Yeah.
Because it can be really tempting to hear words and just react and shoot back a response.
Mhm.
But you're saying there's an opportunity for Miriam to really think about what is my child trying to tell me right now?
Yeah.
And one of the simple things that I like to say is, well, we could just continue using Miriam and Bob, but like if Bob speaks, and let's say, let's use a different example, like Bob walks in the door and says, "Oh, I had the worst day at school today." It's often really tempting for the listener and maybe it's Bob's sister Rebecca. Bob's sister Rebecca says, "Oh, me too." And Bob's sister Rebecca starts talking about her horrible
Yeah.
day. Now,
Yeah.
again, say me too. Rebecca probably thinks, "Yeah, I'm there with my brother Bob, and we're bonding on this moment."
hmm
But when Rebecca starts talking about herself, Rebecca
hmm
really isn't listening at all. And
Yeah.
so it's an example of Bob is sharing something, and then rather than focusing on what Bob
Mm.
shared, Rebecca is sharing her own thing.
Yeah.
And you know what's interesting? A lot of people in this world really believe that
Yeah.
that's what communication is. You
Yeah.
share something, I share something. You share something,
Yeah.
I share something. Folks, that's a form of communication, I guess, but it's not a great one. And it
Yeah.
involves almost no listening. It would be
Yeah.
like, it would be like I tell my husband I love red wine. He says I like white wine. And then I say, well, I want to have fish for dinner. And he says, well, I want to have steak for dinner. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, we're both sharing things, but at some
hmm
point it actually feels like we are competing or
Yeah.
arguing rather
Yeah.
than,
Or comparing.
so, okay, so it could be, it's at some point it starts to feel like we are competing or
Mm.
arguing or comparing.
hmm
And they're, both people maybe end up feeling like no one's really listening.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think too, it's interesting to think about like there are many different ways of communicating with others. And I think it's really important to stand up and think about like what is the purpose of my listening here? Like what's my purpose? Is my purpose to listen, to understand, or is my purpose to listen to identify with with the other person, like, oh, I really understand what you say and I had that too. Like that's more of an identification instead of like actually understanding. So I always like to like rethink that. What's my purpose? And maybe sometimes it's okay to do all of that, but if your purpose is to try and help someone, often we need to help like based on their own needs, right? Not my needs of wanting to share and be involved.
It's room for both.
Yeah.
I can think of a time, I don't even remember what I was talking about. I mean, it doesn't matter now, but whatever it was important to me at the time. And I was
hmm
sharing it with my husband, and he shared his own feelings back to me.
Yeah.
And, I thought to myself, all right, fine. And then we went another round like that where I was trying to like get him to focus on me again, and he talked
hmm
about himself again. And I think we went 3 rounds of me trying to be patient and be like, oh my gosh, you are not
hmm
listening to me, before I finally said, hey, could you like comment on anything I said, or like just
hmm
just show me that you heard it. And he got annoyed with me, and he said, well, I thought we were both sharing. How come we both can't share?
Yeah.
Well, of course we can. Of,
Yeah.
of course we can. But I guess what I think is a more generous way of communicating is if I share something with my husband, he
Mm.
acknowledges what I've
hmm
said. And then maybe after acknowledging what
Yeah.
I have said, then there is space for him to share his own thoughts and feelings. And then I
Exactly.
will and then I will acknowledge what he has said before
hmm
I share my own thoughts and feelings.
Yeah.
It might slow things down a little bit, but not
Mm.
a lot. Just slows
hmm
them down a little bit.
Well, and I don't think that's a bad thing either to slow things down. I mean, we're kind of like chickens running around with our heads cut off lately in the world. And that's why I think I love this model so much. I actually love it more than I used to because I see this all the time is like it's about completing the circle, right? Like you've got the speaker thinking something, wanting to express something, expressing it, the listener understands something, interprets it, and then checks if the interpretation is the same as what the person meant, right? And that is like completing the circle, and then you can answer. So it's like, yeah, I get what you mean, is like it might feel like it's an extra step, but it's less of an extra step than if you're communicating with each other in parallel and you're going different ways, and then all of a sudden you've got like 3 kilometers in between.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, taking one extra step can
Mhm.
save you weeks of arguing with each other.
Exactly. Yeah. And all of the things that happen in our head too, because as I was thinking about this example, like Bob, the teen, and then Miriam, the mom, right? Like the frustration and irritation, it actually is to hear that when it's like, I do everything I can to like fill this fridge with food, and then you ungrateful person comes and says that there's nothing to eat, right? And I think it's like that's a lot of heartache and pain and negative feelings that kind of that can be detrimental to a relationship. So, I mean, just taking that extra step can, I think, help you, I don't know, keep your relationship and mental health.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think about what you're describing as this full circle
Hmm.
of, you know, listening to somebody, taking in what they've said, checking it to see if you've
Hmm.
understood it. I think when we take a beat, when we take that beat to just say, let me just check this,
Hmm.
the subtle message that we send is what you've said is so important to me
Hmm.
that I want to make sure I'm understanding it.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And that's the whole thing with that's what empathy is. Like trying to understand and like communicating that willingness to understand a person and creating that space for them actually to understand themselves. So like listening isn't about like a dialogue, really, or you know what I mean? Communication is more than a dialogue between two people. It's about like self-discovery as well. And I think if we keep that as one of our like purposes to listening, then that'll definitely increase all of our relationships in the future, and provide space for everyone to grow, not just have like this kind of pecking. I get a tug of war in my head when I'm thinking about that. Like the comparison thing is like you share, then I share, then you share. It's like a teeter totter instead of like a like a collaboration of like we both are trying to develop. So.
Yeah, like you, I was trying to think of like an image or a metaphor for this, and I don't think I've landed on a great one, but I'm just going to share it anyway because it's the
Yeah.
best I've got. I started to imagine two people like standing over like a pot on the stove and we're
Mm-hmm.
cooking.
Mm-hmm.
And I throw some spice in, and then they throw some spice in,
Yeah.
and then I throw some ingredient in, they throw an ingredient in. And we just keep throwing ingredients in without ever tasting it.
Exactly.
And
Yeah,
and
that's a
the
good one.
there's a danger in that
Yeah.
because you could over salt something, like
Yeah.
it could taste terrible. Or we don't even know what the other person's trying to make.
Yeah.
So, like, I'm throwing sugar in, but they're throwing salt in. And what are we making here?
Yeah.
And that was the best metaphor I could think of. It's like sometimes it feels like we're all just throwing ingredients in a pot and
Mm.
nobody's tasting what we're making.
Yeah. Oh, I like that. I like that a lot because there's a whole bunch that you can put in there. I liked how you said that, well, we haven't even communicated about what we're making. We're just like throwing in ingredients, right? And then like what if I'm making a cake and you're making a stew? Like how is that going to taste? And that's all because we just didn't give us the opportunity to say, "Hey, what would you like to make today? I feel like this. What do you feel like?" Like, yeah, basics. You're right. Back to basics.
And, the reason I said I don't love the metaphor is I worry about metaphors that sound kind of absurd because I'm sure people are thinking, but I would never do that with like
Yeah.
cooking, right? Like
Yeah.
like there would never be a scenario where one person's making a cake and the other one's making a soup and we're just trying to do this together. So I know, folks, it's why it's just a metaphor. It's not really meant to be real life. I certainly don't think anyone's doing that in real life, but I
No.
think I think with our communication we are though.
Mm,
Like
I
we're
do.
all
Yeah.
just we're all just throwing things out there and we're not stopping to
Mhm.
say what are we talking about here.
Well, exactly. And I think, I mean, okay, you're right. The metaphor, like with the cake and the stew thing, is a little much. But I'm thinking, like, let's say you're both making a stew and you're still throwing different ingredients. Like, I could be allergic to something you throw in. And that's also we can put that towards communication as well as I might I know lately I've been noticing about myself because we talk a lot about communication and stuff in the work we do. It's like it drives me bonkers when there's people who are very, very focused on solutions. And it happens a lot, or when I really want to give advice and stuff. And I'm almost like more allergic to that now than I was like many years ago because I see how this whole I want to help you just like can make the other person feel even worse. And that's nobody wants to achieve that, right? So I even find myself that I'm really kind of picky, like when I hear like, oh, there you're starting to do something and I'm not really liking, or especially towards my kids when there's like a teacher or a coach or something like that going like, I'm going to tell you what to do and do this and that and the other thing. And I'm like, because I know I'm going to have the conversation when I get home. So I think it's really important just to kind of slow down, and like, what do I want of the like in this communication? What's the purpose of my listening? Am I okay to provide space for someone else, or do I feel like I need to like claw my way in the space? Um, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing to me after this is now our 13th season and we're in
Mhm.
like, 125 episodes. And even when we're in some really specific topic that I think is kind of off the rails, almost every episode comes back to we've got to stop trying to solve problems for people
Yes.
and just be with them and hear them and there's a way to support them without
Mm,
trying to fix them.
mm,
And it's been unbelievable to me that we could have almost any topic be
mm,
what we're focused on, and it always seems to come back to we have this gut urge to jump in and try
mhm.
and fix the things that are happening around
Yeah.
us. And you're right, if we could just take a beat, like
Mm,
no one is saying you can't ever solve a problem, but
right.
my goodness, take a
Hmm.
beat, you know?
Yeah. Well, and
Yeah.
it's always, I think too, that comes back to the idea. Again, there's a Swedish word that I can't translate into English, and it's too bad because it's, this feeling of like I like we compare it to like having to go to the bathroom. I think I talked about this too on the podcast where I'm like, ooh, I really have to go to the bathroom. They call that being pee needy. And so we've started kind of using the word help needy as like, the same sort of thing as I really, really want to help someone. And then when I help them, it's like, but that's my need that's being fulfilled and not the other person. I mean, the other person's needs might be a little bit fulfilled, but the goal was for my relief to take place, right? And that has helped me kind of stand up and say, when I go in and I help, or when I go in and I listen, who am I satisfying right now? Me as the listener? Am I trying to be like awesome helper? Or is this really for the other person? And I think that that's kind of a hard, what's the word? Like, I think that it's hard to kind of face that and
Mhm.
be able to say like, you know what? I went over the line there because I couldn't handle that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
uh,
Well, right. I think a big part of this is becoming more self-aware about
mhm,
um, our own actions and behavior. Like if we even go back to your example of Bob the teenager at the refrigerator, it would be really easy for Miriam to be like, what a bratty kid, you know,
yeah,
that, I sit here and do all this for him,
yeah,
and all he can say is there's nothing to eat. And then she shouts something back at him, and then he storms off, and she thinks, what a jerk he's being.
yeah,
And okay, maybe a little bit he is. Yeah,
mhm,
sure.
mhm,
I can agree with Miriam. And while
mhm,
I agree with Miriam, I can also wish that Miriam could look at herself a little bit too.
yeah,
That
yeah,
both things are important. Um, One of the things that I hear a lot from people is that when they are trying to be a good listener, they get anxious because they feel like they're not helping.
mm,
Even when they're in their head saying, okay, I listened to 13 seasons of this podcast. I know not to jump in and solve problems, but they'll sit there anxiously trying to hold it back, and they're telling themselves, just be a good listener, just be a good listener, just be a good listener. And it's so hard. And I think it's because we have an image in our minds of what help looks like.
Yeah.
And the image in our minds has us, like saving the day, wearing a cape and being a hero. And there's lots of high fives, and everybody's like, wow, I feel so much better. And being a good listener often doesn't look like that.
No.
I will say, though, that being a good listener can look like that. And
Mhm.
it often doesn't, but it can. And the example I'll give is from my work in mental health. I mean, there were times
Mm.
someone would come meet with me, and I'd say, so what brings you in today?
Mhm.
And they would go on this long speech
Yeah.
about, there's all this arguing in my home, and my kids are at each other's throats, and I don't know how to intervene, and it's caused my husband and I to fight all the time because we don't agree on how to parent the kids, and so there's tension all over the place, and now my in-laws are coming to visit, and I don't know what I'm going to do when you throw them into the mix, and everything just feels like it's falling apart, and I've got all these people at work mad at me because I'm not focused on my work because I've been more focused on my family. And people say all of that.
Mm.
And when I'm able to say back to them in one clear sentence, something like, so your relationships are really taking a toll on you right now.
Yeah.
You wouldn't, well, you probably would believe, but a lot of people would not believe
Yeah.
how often folks would just go, yes,
Yeah. Yep.
thank you. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you for putting it so clearly.
Mhm.
All of these relationships are really weighing me down right now.
Yeah.
And that's just how powerful listening can be. That a
Mhm.
person who came in frantic and chaotic can suddenly be calm, sit back in their chair,
Mhm. Yeah.
enjoy a cleansing breath because I listened and I
Mm.
said it back to them with just a few short words.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, maybe your listening doesn't always feel like you're helping, but it can really help.
Mhm. I think definitely it can, and I think one of the things that would be nice to, and I don't know how to like get it across, but this feeling like I have to do something when I listen, and instead of just being something, um, and what the result of this person's like of my listening, how that person. What the result is according to that person. I think we need to kind of shift the way we think about things. And I wonder if it was when we were in New Zealand and uh, there was it was one of the forums I think where, and I think it was Bill Miller, one of the founders of this motivational interviewing, but I think he talked about a seed, and I always remember that the seed, like, if okay, I know nothing about like greenhouses and stuff, I don't have any green thumbs at all, but if you think about it, a seed, you plant it in the ground and you don't hover over that seed and say, it's time for you to grow now, right? Like, no, so the seed knows what to do. And our role as helpers is to like create the environment so that the seed can really grow to its full potential because it knows what it has to do. And that was so like, it like hit me in the like my heart because I was like, yeah, this is what people are as well. That I don't need to tell them how to grow because they know that already, right? What they need is for me to create an environment of listening well and just maybe validating them when they're, and that will help them grow to their full potential. And then if I do that, I feel better about helping. So it's like, yeah, but it's hard to get away from the behavioral, like I have to do something to
Yeah.
help.
Yeah. Well, and I'll use your metaphor of the seed and kind of apply it to my story of the client coming in whose
Hmm.
life is all chaotic. If I had said to her, well, you should have better relationships,
Yeah.
she would
Yeah.
have been like, uh-huh.
Yeah. Or if you had said, hey, why don't you go to a relationship counselor? I can give you a number and you can call them and you can work on these relationship things. I mean, what would she have done then?
Well,
So
I guess in my story, I'm assuming I am the counselor, but still, whatever.
I'm
Point
not sure she'd
is,
want to stay with you if you told her what to do like that.
yeah, yeah. If I sat there and said, well, you just shouldn't be arguing with your husband when you're trying to parent your kids,
Yeah.
she would have been like, no shit, Sherlock, but like, I'm here for some help with that. So
Yeah.
it's not about telling people what to do. It's about helping them name what's going on
Yeah.
and then helping them name what they would like to do.
Yeah.
I remember when I was in college studying psychology, I was what, 19? Like I didn't know anything about life. And I remember some of my family members, like at, Christmas time, when we would have get-togethers, they would say, oh, you're studying psychology? What do you want to do with that? And I'd say, well,
Mm,
I'd like to be a therapist one day. And they'd look at me and say, well, how are you going to know what to tell people? Like how can you tell people what to do? How do you
mm,
always know what to do? And I even knew by 19 that that's not what therapy was all about. And I
yeah.
remember
Yeah.
saying to them, I wouldn't dare. I
Mm,
wouldn't dare ever tell
yeah.
someone what to do. If that's what you think therapy is, you've got it
Yeah.
all wrong. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And like I said, holding the space for someone else to be able to figure out what they need. Like essentially, best helpers are the people that create a therapy room, right? Not just the therapist and what they do, but the room and the feeling inside that room. That's what's going to encourage change.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Well, and I've often said I don't think you need to be a therapist to offer somebody
mm,
something that feels therapeutic.
mm,
I say that as someone who professionally, most of the trainings I do are with folks who are not therapists. They
hmm.
are
Yep.
advocates or case managers. So they're kind of in the social services, social work space,
Hmm.
but they may not be therapists. And I say to them all the time, you are not a therapist. Let's be
Hmm.
clear. And you can still offer someone an environment or a
Yeah.
space that feels very therapeutic without
Yeah.
being a therapist.
Exactly. And that's one of the things that we've been noticing when we're out training teachers specifically, uh, as a teacher, you're not supposed to be a therapist, like you're supposed to be a teacher, but there is a way of creating an environment where a student or a parent who's like got difficulties with their child to actually like want to hear the solutions that this expertise can give. And I think that's really important. But again, you don't get there without being a good listener,
Yes.
and trying to
Yeah.
understand what the actual problem is and what the person would like for a solution,
Yeah.
based on their perspective.
I'm smiling because as we're talking about like, informal therapists or informal counselors
Mhm.
or folks who may not have the therapist title,
Mm.
it reminds me that like that's how this all started.
Yeah.
I know you have a copy of my book and I
Mhm.
know that you read it because you once sent me a picture of yourself reading it on a beach.
Yes, yes.
But I believe like right on the first page, I talk about how my father was a
Yeah,
bartender and my
that's right.
grandfather was a barber, and
Mhm.
and I don't know if those sort of archetypal images of like men as counselors exist
Mhm.
internationally, but I know in the United States, we think of bartenders and barbers as the therapists that men go to very often.
Mhm. Yep.
And so they may not have had a psychology degree, but
No.
I do believe that I'm from a long line of therapists anyway.
Yeah.
I'm just the first one who's like credentialed in it.
Mhm. Well, and I think that I agree, and I think it would be interesting to find out why, like, well, we know why that is kind of, but I mean, um, maybe that's better that way because if let's say like you're a barber and you know how to cut hair and then what do? You don't know what to say because your expertise is barbery. I don't know if that's a word, but cutting hair, barbery. Anyway, cutting hair or buffing heads, whatever. Um, but I think maybe the pressure's off then, Do you know what I mean? Like, you don't have to have all the answers. Whereas in a therapeutic relationship, you go to a psychologist or a therapist, it's like, you should know because I'm coming to you and I'm paying you.
Yeah.
So maybe there's that kind of dynamic in it too. Whereas there's not the same expectation, which actually is better for both the barber, the helper,
Yeah.
and the person that's wanting to be listened to.
Yeah, could be. And with all the chairs there and all the other people, all the other customers, it's sort of like group therapy.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Well, anyway, I don't know how to bring this to a close, but I want to thank you for bringing us back to basics.
Mhm. Thank you. And, I also want to say to the listeners too is like, whether you're a therapist or a barber or a bartender or a mom or a teacher or whatever, just showing up and providing that space, like being that environment for the seed to grow, that is worth a billion, uh, billion times more than having the proper solutions and the right words to say. So I hope everybody out there continues to just lend that ear and don't be hard on yourself.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think it's important.
Yeah, when you say just showing up, my fear is that some people think it means showing up with advice. No,
Yeah.
it means like just listening and valuing, like just saying
Yeah.
to someone like, let me make sure I'm understanding you and
Mhm.
checking it out. That's a
Yeah.
way of just showing up and being there with
Yeah.
someone, not running away from the conversation, not
Yeah.
not making jokes to try to make it
Yeah.
easier, but like just
Yeah.
saying, all right.
Exactly. Maybe even saying like, thank you for sharing with me. Like, it doesn't have to be anything dramatic, just thank you for letting me in on some of your thoughts.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing.
Mhm.
I care about you. I care about what's happening to you. What else would you like me to know about this? I'd like to know as much as you're willing to tell me.
Mhm.
Things like that. Yeah.
Yep.
Great. Well, we'll do it again, you and I.
Sure, why
If,
not?
if
Thank you
you're
for
willing.
having me.
If you're willing. I shouldn't just demand we will do this again, whether you
I
like it or not.
I would love to. And it's nice to go back to like yeah, the basics and realizing why do we do what we do? Like you can be as, have lots of extra education or study or whatever, deepen your skills in certain things, but being a person to another person is the best. So,
Take me in your arms. I don't want to miss a day without you. Let's stay young forever. There is nothing we can't do. And nothing can break us apart when we're together. Facing the sky, we know that we can fly on the wings of love. And we can climb on every mountain top. I never knew eternity was real till I met you. Since that day, I live in a dream.